This time around we're going to be talking about Lab 11, which covers natural selection in your lab manual. Since I already have a lecture recorded for evolution and natural selection, I'm not going to read through all the stuff and re-talk about Darwin and Lamarck and observations and deductions and any of that sort of stuff. So if you feel like you want just another lecture over those things, go back and watch a different one of the lecture videos that I have recorded and posted on my YouTube channel. Reading through the lab manual should be able to get you what you need as well. So this is just me kind of reminding you, you're still responsible for it. I'm just not going to re-lecture over that same stuff again. So there's a little activity to do in this chapter, and unfortunately, since we can't be together, it makes it hard for us to do this as a class to see how things are going to work. But in this activity, we're supposed to pick an animal, and I have been totally jamming on Katmai National Park's bear cam because it is salmon spawning time right now. And so what you're seeing in this picture, it's Brooks Falls, which is in Katmai National Park, which is in Alaska. When the salmon spawn, this area is just inundated with brown bears, which are the same thing as grizzly bears. P.S. They're the same species. Some of the bears stand on top of the falls, some of them are below the falls, and they're all just there gorging on salmon so they can get fat enough to be able to hibernate through the winter. Since I have been watching these bears rip fish in half for the past couple of days, I decided to pick a bear out of the picture that they have. So it's really hard to pick one habitat that they live in because brown bears are actually very widespread. You can find them in the tundra, you can find them in the Great Plains, you can find them in this area. And so since I'm talking about the ones in Katmai National Park, this park is part of evergreen woodlands, and so that's what I'm going with as our example. Okay, it tells us to pick some modifications. Now ordinarily you would be in groups of 4 and each person in the group would pick a modification. I'm all by myself and I didn't want to pick 4, so I just picked 3. And so these are the modifications that I picked for bears because who knows why, I just picked these guys. So extra thick fur, longer claws, and gills to breathe underwater. Now what would happen after this is I would roll the dice. I just randomly found this picture of a dice that has rolled to a 5, and so we're going to say that I rolled a 5. What a 5 does is it says that this particular disaster that is going to befall the area where the bears live is that human impact flooded the area to create a lake for drinking water. So we built a dam, essentially. So we're supposed to predict how my organism is going to fare. Well, if you look back at the modifications that I said, this one that I picked as a fluke is actually going to really come in handy based on that decision that was made by a roll of the dice that made it a 5. So I think the modified bears are going to be great because we flooded their habitat, but they had gills so they can breathe in flooded habitat and do just fine. After that, we're supposed to pick which modifications are going to help them, which ones aren't going to help them. So the gills are definitely going to help if we flooded a particular area. However, I did also say they were going to get doubly thick fur, and animals that live and swim underwater, fur can really slow them down, so they wouldn't be very fast as they're swimming around underwater. Might help them stay warm as they're out and they're hibernating if they can find some dry land, but it's not going to help them in that flooded water. The longer claws wouldn't really help or hurt underwater. It might make them a little bit more likely to catch fish that are in the area, but it wouldn't help any more than was already going to be helped based on this particular disaster. Then the instructions say if you could switch a modifications, what would you pick and why? And so what I said was maybe lose that extra thick fur since it was hurting the bears and pick paddle feet because paddle feet would help them swim faster underwater, and if you're living in a flooded habitat, it's really helpful to be able to swim that much faster. So that's what would have happened if somebody had picked bear and my weird modifications that I picked for said bear. After that in the lab manual, it starts to talk about how natural selection works, and I want you to understand it does not work even remotely like the activity that we just picked a second ago. Nothing gets to choose what modifications it wants to have. Like, we can't flood the earth with climate change and then go, well, screw it, let's just make humans have gills and then everything's going to be okay because we're going to be able to swim underwater. It doesn't work like that. You have to work with whatever genes you're given, although CRISPR and genetic modification is on the horizons, naturally speaking, you can't do that. So natural selection relies on naturally occurring mutations. Your DNA mutates all the time. So does every organism on the planet. When sunlight hits DNA, you get these things called thymine dimers. It makes mutations more likely to happen. Sometimes during the DNA replication process, the enzymes that carry it out screw up, and so you get a mutation just because the enzyme put the wrong base in there. that's your DNA and your cells right now is not the same as the DNA that you were born with, because mutation has changed it slightly over time. Not enough to kill you yet, but it's getting there for those of you that are getting older. There's a nice morbid thought for you. Okay, they give us a scenario to think about. So we've got this population of mice, and I don't know if you've ever seen mice, but mice can come in different colors just like people can come in different colors. And so they want us to consider this population of mice where there's some really dark ones, where they're calling them black ones, and there's some lighter tan ones in the area. They had lived in an area where everything was sort of variegated, or there was some darker areas, there were some lighter areas, so this population was fitted into the environment. But something happened that made them move from the black rock to a sandy beach. And our issue is there are these hawks that circle overhead that really love to eat these little mice. The mice that they can see better are the ones that they are more likely to catch when they're hunting and more likely to eat. So predict what would happen to the black mice when they move to a sandy beach. And I think it even said beige sandy beach or something along those lines. So if they move to that, the beige mice, the tan mice, would blend in better. The black ones would stand out except in the shadows. And that would mean that the black ones would be more likely to be eaten when they are on a tan beach. Predict what would happen to the tan mice. They would become more prevalent in the population because they could hide in the sand better, and it would make it harder for the hawk to be able to see them. Will the hawks follow the mice to the sandy area? Well, if mice are moving, they're not going to be moving too very far, and so more than likely the hawks are going to be able to find them. And as long as the mice are one of their main components of their diet, the hawk's definitely going to follow them because you follow your food sources. Hawks can also just span huge areas of territory, and so they're not going to have a problem finding mice who are moving a couple hundred yards upstream or whatever. If the hawks, when living in a black rock area, had developed an adaptation that allowed them to see greater contrast between the tan mice and the black rocks, this would allow the hawks to be very efficient hunters of the tan mice when in the black rock habitat. Now the mice and hawks are in a new environment with this beige sand. Will that greater contrast adaptation be able to help them or hinder them? Well, greater contrast is greater contrast, and so in theory they would still be able to see the tan mice a little bit better, but it's still going to make the black mice end up declining because they're still going to be able to see the black mice better than they would be able to see the tan mice on there. So it's not really going to give them all that much of an advantage for the hawks to see the tan mice when they move to the beige sand. After that in the lab manual, there's a whole bunch of different videos that they have linked to for you to watch, some from Khan Academy, some from other sources. After that, there's a page of questions. As you watch the videos, answer those questions, because in the videos they answer those questions for you. So just watch those videos and answer those questions as you watch those videos. Alright. After that, they start to talk about some of the other evidence that supports the idea of evolution and natural selection, and structures are a big part of that. You can have homologous structures, vestigial structures, analogous structures. First one that has a question for us is homologous structures. Now, homologous structures are similar due to relatedness or due to genetic similarity. So here you're looking at the arm bones of a bunch of different organisms. They've listed the names of the organisms down below: human, cat, horse, bat, dolphin. All of these are mammals. Yes, a dolphin is a mammal, not a fish. The forearms of all of these are very different. You guys know what your arm looks like. Dolphins have flippers. Cats have a leg that is pretty similar to our leg, as it turns out. Horse is very different. They walk on their tippy toes, and so their whole foreleg is actually not a foreleg, it's their foot. And then what you think of as their knee isn't their knee, it's actually their ankle. And then the top part of their leg, that's actually the bottom part of their leg. Horses are confusing because they are hooved animals. Bats, this is the wing of a bat. Now, what I want you to notice is they want us to consider the front leg bones, which for us is arms. Your arms are technically your front legs, although I don't like to call them that. But when you look at the front leg bones, you have a humerus, a radius, and an ulna, and then you've got the ones that make up your hand. They have color-coded all of them in all the other animals. And notice every single one of these guys that are all mammals, they have a humerus, a radius, an ulna, and then the hand bones. Even this animal that has a flipper that would do just fine with one bone that extended down the flipper, they still have all the same bones that you have that make up your arms, and your legs for that matter. And so these bones, they're homologous structures. We have them in common because a common ancestor that was called the tetrapod had all of these bones in this configuration, and we evolved from those tetrapods, so we still have those structures. They look very different in all four of us, but we still all have those same structures. Next, last really, now again, your lab manual does also talk about analogous structures and vestigial structures. They also have a really good section on invasive species. Read through all of those sections and make sure you understand them. But then we come to the questions at the back of the chapter. What are the main principles of Darwin's theory of natural selection? It's that nature selects for or against a particular trait or organism, if you want to look at it that way. So if you go back to that black and tan mice sort of situation, when they're on the black rocks, nature is selecting against the tan mice because the hawk sees the tan mice and eats them, and if you've been eaten, it's really hard for you to have sex and make babies. And so that's why nature selected for the black ones, because they survived, they could reproduce and pass their genes on to the next generation. What are some modern pieces of evidence that support the idea of natural selection? Probably the best evidence that has come out fairly recently involves molecular genetics. Let's even talk, so we're currently working from home right now because of COVID-19. We're able to tell how related different strains of COVID-19 are, like how the American strain is different from the Italian strain, which is different from the Chinese strain. We can look at what animal it probably came from, which right now there's two lines of thought. It's either a bat or it's a pangolin, but genetics shows us which of those it is, and then we can see how the virus is evolving over time. There's one particular mutant gene that is becoming more prevalent in the population of COVID-19 virus particles, and right now we're not sure if that mutation makes it more communicable so it spread faster, or was it just random chance that happened to allow that particular strain to evolve. But evolution is happening in real time all the time. It's just that the average person doesn't read about the molecular genetics of viruses on a day-to-day, and so you don't necessarily see that evidence. Do invasive species support Darwin's theory? They do, and I'm going to answer the second part of the question to help answer the first part, survival of the fittest. When an invasive species moves into a new area, as long as there is a food source available to it, it is able to eat that and reproduce and do its thing, but because it's in a new area, the things that had preyed upon it are usually not there. The diseases that had made it sick when it was back home are usually not there. So let's talk the red imported fire ants. That's one that they mention in the lab manual. The red imported fire ant originally came from South America. We believe it hit North America on a ship that came into port, we think in Alabama. It came in on some produce, more than likely, and then from there it spread all over the place. Well, if you go to South America, the red imported, it's not the imported fire ant for them, it's just the red fire ant. It's not all that common a species because there's a number of fungi and parasitic wasps and nematodes that prey on those fire ants, and it keeps their population down at low numbers. When they moved here into the United States, though, those fungi aren't here, so they don't have that, I'll call it a parasite or a pathogen, I guess, whichever way you want to call that. That pathogen is no longer there to keep its numbers in check. All those other predators, from the parasitic wasps to the huge numbers of frogs and lizards that would eat the fire ants, they don't live here, and so the fire ant was able to explode in population and move all over the place, and when they got here they outcompeted our native ants, which, P.S. weird side note, that is a big part of the reason why you almost never see horny toads in our area in Texas anymore. Fire ants can kill a horny toad, and yet horny toads eat ants all day every day, but they can't eat ants that swarm them like the fire ants do. And so invasive species like fire ants can show you a lot about survival of the fittest. They are fitter than our ants that naturally occurred here. They reproduce faster, and they have behaviors that allow them to take down predators that are much larger than them. So yeah, they're evolving faster and taking over our continent, essentially. Compare and contrast homologous versus analogous structures. So both of these, for the comparison, they are structures that look similar between different species. The difference is homologous structures are similar because of genetic relatedness, and like that, horse, dolphin, homologous structure arm thingy, all of those had those features because they were all evolved from that tetrapod. Analogous structures, on the other hand, look the same just because they were evolved in the same kind of habitat, not because they needed them. So, for example, a butterfly wing is very different from a bird wing. They do not come from the same structures at all, and yet they're both wings that allow them to fly. And so those are analogous, and they don't show relatedness. It just shows they both happen to fly, so they needed some wings. Okay, last question. The mice moved to a varied habitat that has some black rocks and it has some tan sand. What would happen? Well, both populations of black and tan mice would be able to find their own personal little habitats within this area and then survive. And so we maybe end up with something like a 50-50 ratio of black mice versus tan mice, because they would all have a place that they could go hide when the hawk was swooping by overhead. Hopefully that allows you to understand the idea of evolution a little bit. Again, if you just want some more stuff, there's a bunch of videos out there that can help you out with the idea.